Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
It's also being recorded. That's the last thing that we mentioned, John.
Awesome.
I managed too many pages. I almost shared it on the wrong one. So it's just preparing. We're just going to give folks just a few more minutes, just maybe one more minute to log on. Okay. Sorry, now I'm just making sure it's live on Facebook. Okay, it's still preparing. I don't know why it's doing that. Alrighty, y'all, we're gonna go ahead and get started. And so we're so excited to be here. And so welcome everyone to our Advocacy 101 for Emerging Leaders event. My name is Jamie Tercios. I am the Census Community Engagement Intern here at Every Texan.
And hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Irma Samarripa, and I'm the Civic Engagement Intern for NALEO Educational Fund.
And we're so excited to be here hosting this event. And we have an amazing lineup of speakers today that we're so excited to hear from. And so we're going to go ahead and start with introductions.
Awesome. So we're very excited, as Jamie said. We have two amazing speakers from the Northeast region. So today joining us, we have Afna Nahela, who's the Communications Director for State Senator James Eldridge in Massachusetts. And we're also joined by John Valinch, who's the Campaign Manager for Damali Vido. And in the Texas region, we're joined by Maria Yolisma Garcia, who's the immediate past president for the North Texas Dream Team. And we're also joined by Juani Torres, who's the Public Policy Fellow at the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs at UT Austin.
All righty, and so thank you all for being here. Like I said, we're so excited to have y'all, and we're gonna go ahead and get started with the first question. And so the first question is, in 60 seconds or less, why is advocacy so important to you? And I'm just gonna throw this question at Juani first, if you wanna start us off, no pressure.
Sure. So advocacy to me is incredibly important because it is the way that we can make our voices heard, especially as marginalized folks, people that have been put on the sidelines for centuries, right? People that have not had a seat at the table, people that have had policy intentionally made to exclude us and oppress us. So to me, advocacy is the way we own our power back and we organize and change the way that things are now so that they can be more equitable for our families, for our communities, and for ourselves.
Thank you. And whoever wants to go next.
I'll kick it up to Maria.
Thanks for that, Juani. I think you put in a really well shaped response. I couldn't agree more. I think when I also think of advocacy, I think back to a lot of children of immigrants who have to advocate on their parents' side. Even as a really young age, we start to own our voice a little bit more. And so advocacy has no age. And it doesn't live in a specific space. I think advocacy can be anywhere and be utilized for anything. So for me, advocacy starts wherever and whenever.
Awesome. Thank you, Maria. John, do you want to take it from here?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. I would agree in so many ways about the importance of advocacy. I think one thing that I would emphasize is that in 2020, with the election of Trump, with everything that's going on in the country, the resurgence of kind of a white supremacist legion of folks, right, from coast to coast. I think it's so clear that if we don't do the work, if we do not advocate and educate and build capacity for our communities, then no one's going to do it. And so I think advocacy is so important because all of our communities, wherever we come from, already have the resources and the tools to organize, to work together, and to win what we deserve. But we just have to put it together, and we have to get together. So yeah, again, really appreciate it for all of you, and thank you.
Afnan.
Thank you. I just want to echo what you all said. I completely agree. And as someone who comes from a minority group and also a marginalized community, I've come to learn that also no one will know the issues that are directly impacting my community unless I stand up for myself and I advocate for those issues and I let others know what's happening. And I think that if there's a decision that's being made about my life or my community or education or whatever it is, I think that I should have a say in it and I should give that voice to that community that's the voiceless community. So I think that really honestly, without advocacy, I don't think there's going to be change. Without outreach to legislators, I don't think that they're going to know what's going on for them to even provide those resources. So it really is, to me, the catalyst of change, and that's why it's really important.
Mm-hmm. Wow, thank you all so much. I really love what each of you said, especially without advocacy, there is no change, because it's completely true. And so now I'm so excited to move on to the next set of questions, and Irma, take it away.
Thank you, Jamie. So our first question is for both John and Afnan. We kind of want to know, what it's like working right now in the political sector during a time of COVID-19. If you can talk a little bit on that and kind of what are the challenges that you have faced and what's the advocacy work looking like right now in this time?
Do you want to speak first, Afnan?
Sorry, you can go ahead.
Okay, all right. So I imagine there might be, the responses are situated a little differently where I'm working on building up a grassroots campaign in the midst of COVID. So I'll speak from that experience. So Damali Vito is a current third term Chelsea City Councilor at large. And she is running for state representative of the Massachusetts 2nd Suffolk District. And so that encompasses all of Charlestown, which is a neighborhood of Boston, and most of Chelsea, Massachusetts, which folks might have heard about recently. It's the hotspot of COVID-19 in Massachusetts, and indeed the death and infection rates were higher than in the hardest hit boroughs of New York. And so, our work is informed by this community, a predominantly working class Latino community that has been hit so hard by COVID. And so, advocacy, in a lot of ways, is still what it was. It's still about connecting with people. It's still about amplifying the needs of people and meeting people where they're at, but the format has changed a little bit. And so, this campaign, we focused a lot more on virtual engagement, holding virtual meet and greets, virtual fundraisers, and doing a ton of panels like these so that we can connect with people. One that I'm really excited about, actually, we're doing a Latinx town hall this Saturday at 11 a.m. For the campaign. And it's really just to kind of give an opportunity for our community to come out and speak with us and share what's going on right now. Because I think, we're doing a real disservice if we just say, well, it's COVID, it's too hard to get with people, and we kind of follow the same old ways of trying to connect and do what we've always done. And so I think it's really incumbent upon all of us to kind of get creative. So yeah, I think that's like virtual platforms, but also in terms of organizing, apps, like we're using things like Reach, which allow people to relationally organize among themselves. We're talking like aunts and uncles and moms and dads. And so kind of making, presenting the tools that make it easier for people to connect with each other and sharing those with folks has been kind of a cornerstone of what we're doing.
Yeah, kind of similar to that. I think our work kind of like shifted drastically in 3 different sectors. I think the first one is obviously legislation-wise. Anything that was not directly affected or had anything to do with pandemic was completely dropped. So if there was any bill that we were talking about or any policy that we were having discussions about, those were kind of completely put to the sidelines, which could have been, it was a good and a bad thing. A good thing in the sense that we were focusing a lot more on issues that were, needed to have attention to. They were emergency almost. We were filing a lot of emergency bills, focusing on issues like business insurance, and a lot of businesses were losing a lot of money, so we needed to kind of file help for them. COVID relief funds, unemployment was a huge one that we were working on as well, even improving prison conditions. So there was kind of like a huge wide range of issues that we had to just pinpoint on and kind of put everything else on the sidelines. Another thing, just kind of like John was saying, communication was a huge one. Just how are we putting out the resources? We are no longer able to do in-person meetings with advocates or in-person meetings with constituents. So how are we conducting those in a manner that was personal, interactive, and we were also giving them that effect of we are here, we are listening to you, we are attending to your issue. So that was another thing that we kind of had to create new strategies for. And a lot of that was just kind of like embarking on the virtual world and understanding it and finding new ways of maneuvering it in a way that was effective and really reaching people like we used to reach them. And then, like I said, another thing was also working with coworkers and other senators and other legislators. We are no longer able to just pop into someone's office and talk to them about a bill or talk to them about an issue that is like happening in the district or an issue that we are sharing together. So that was another kind of obstacle that we had to deal with, but it really required us just putting in more effort, and understanding the areas that were super important that we needed to prioritize, that we're able to reach individuals better, reach the individuals that we were working with better, our colleagues and those who were working with us to create that change and create legislation that was going to be affecting the individuals who were impacted by the pandemic.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So on that note, I know Afnan, on your end, we were able to work together with Senator Jamie Eldridge, kind of just talking about, policies such as the Safe Communities Act and stuff like that. So in Massachusetts, I know that there's, a large momentum of getting, young people, especially college students, involved. So one of the questions that I have for both of you is, how do you get young people involved, and what do you recommend for them right now to continue that momentum, even though kind of the platform that is there for them is a little bit different, considering we're in a time of COVID-19?
I think one of the biggest ways that we were able to get younger people involved is really responding to them when they reach out to us. We were seeing that there's actually a large group of individuals who were actually reaching out, college students and high school students, who were trying to create that momentum that you were talking about, but most of the time they weren't really getting the response that they were looking for, or they weren't really having their energy reciprocated, and thus the momentum would be lost. So one of the things that we focused on, and through meeting you, Irma, it was through meeting and actually giving that face time to students who were in college and students who were in high school, and giving them the attention that they needed, the information that they needed. Because I think one of the most important things was the information. A lot of them just didn't know that a lot of things and resources existed for them. So by giving them those information, we empowered them to continue using it once they were done and they left our office. So it's kind of just, sharing with them information and providing ourselves and our offices as resources for them to always reach out and understand that there are people there for them who are willing to listen and are willing to help them create change, advocate, organize, and vocalize, which is super important in what they were looking for as well.
Thank you. John, would you like to add anything?
I would, yeah. I would second all of what Afnan said, and I think particularly underscore the fact that you really have to meet younger people where they're at, and really tap into that. I also want to highlight, right, that COVID in 2020, if anything, has also shown us the surge of youth leadership. Afnan, you mentioned high schoolers even. I received a message in my inbox today for the campaign for a high school leader of a Young Democrats movement who's looking for ways to engage in the campaign. And so I think it's about honoring the actual energy and commitment that so many young people are showing, as well as the kind of new organizing talent that they all are bringing into this. And so I think for too long, young people have been dismissed for a number of reasons, but actually what we're seeing here is, we need transitions of leadership. We need new ideas from younger people, and we need that energy to actually catalyze the types of kind of progressive world building and policy changes that I think many of us are supportive of. And so I think it's absolutely critical that we get young people involved.
Awesome, thank you. So Jamie, you want to take it away?
Yes, thank you so much, each of you. I think everyone will find that extremely helpful in ways to really get involved. And now I'm really excited to go to Texas and talk more to Juani and Maria. I know that both of you work with a diverse group of people and undocumented people, people of color. And my first question to both of you is, how do you get people engaged when they're undocumented, and sometimes the fear of being undocumented and being involved in politics can kind of create that fear of getting involved? And so if you have any recommendations of how people can navigate that.
That's a great question. And, it all comes down to what people's knowledge is of what their powers are and aren't. I think there's a lot of myths when it comes to understanding status and what you can and can't do. I know I kind of look back into my undocumented experience, which now I'm a naturalized citizen, but back then it was like, to protest, you had to go with a G128. Like, there were much more things that you kind of had to have in hand. But back to the question of, you know, how do we empower folks? And it just goes back to understanding that advocacy piece of their voice really is important, even with local politics and holding their elected, you know, elected officials accountable. I think that's super important. And when we talk about, you know, organizing on a local level, we're always like, you can definitely get involved. You can definitely also just say your first name. You don't have to sign any documents that you don't feel comfortable with. We want to hear your voice, because far too often their voices are not heard because of that fear. And if it looks like, you know, just advocating on behalf of an organization. I know with the North Texas Dream Team, we have a front of volunteers who kind of take their voices to these electeds and stuff like that, but always reminding them of their rights. You know, you don't have to give everything away, but we definitely want to hear your voice. You live in this country, you deserve every piece of, you know, living in terms of how we can protect you. So those are just some things. And in the state of Texas, it's hard, right? Because then you go back and look at legislation like SB4 that has continued to criminalize just people living here. And for those who aren't familiar, SB4 was definitely like a show me your papers bill that was passed in a very rude way by our governor here in the state of Texas. He signed this bill into law on Facebook Live, almost as a mockery to our community, and just a, you know, a continued press of like this anti-immigrant rhetoric that the state holds. So it's about arming our community with that information of knowing your rights. It's a lot of reactive work, unfortunately, when we have to get on the ground and in terms of deportations and things of that nature. But, you know, we always want to make sure that our folks are well knowledged in what they can do and how they can fight back.
Thank you so much, Maria. And if you have anything to add, Juani?
I would say, you know, we need to be very, and I appreciate everything Maria said, we need to be very cognizant of the fact that the fear is real and even more so now, right, under this administration. So I think what I've seen some organizations do, and often it's people that do not come from the communities that they're trying to reach, is see it in a patronizing tone, or why don't these folks just get involved? The reality is that there's true fear, it's valid fear, and we need to meet people where they're at. The messenger is very important. We need to hire, right? Organizations need to hire people from the community that they're trying to reach. So if your goal is to get more undocumented families and more DACA students and more naturalized citizens involved, then you need to hire those folks, right? It's important that we invest and put our money where our mouth is. So I just think, you know, for me, my organizing, I've done so many different political campaigns, but also organized it with nonprofits and with organizations, and on issue-based campaigns as well, not just candidates. Leading with our core values first is going to be so important, and leading both internally inside our organizations, our campaigns, our nonprofits, and outwardly with who we organize is so important. So when it comes to our undocumented workers, our undocumented families, especially in a very terrible state, a toxic state, hostile state to immigrants like Texas, we need to center them. We need to center their safety, and we need to hire and make sure that our messengers understand to the core what that community is going through.
Thank you so much, both of you. If there was a snapping Zoom icon, I would love to use it right now. Everyone just get out your snaps. I think both of you make excellent points. As a DACA recipient myself, I know that I want to be out there, but sometimes there is that fear. But when people, when trusted messengers tell me that I can still have a voice and still go out there and just really fight for my community, it's just another reassurance to keep working. And so we're going to go ahead and move on to our next question. And this one is for Maria. We know that in June, the U.S. Supreme Court released the decision on DACA, and it was a victory for DACA recipients, but we know that the fight continues. And if you can talk more about what it means to continue the fight and what it means in your community, that would be great.
Yeah, so in June, recent memo from USCIS took that away. So I think that was a really unfortunate moment for our community, one that was almost expected. it's really heartbreaking to be in a space where we have to continuously go up against this uphill battle all the time, in terms of just like, where is it going to be? But as a reminder, you know, DACA was won by people power. And to Juani's point, you know, when we own our power to tackle these issues, this is how just important advocacy really is. And, you know, we brought this program to life because of folks like, you know, anybody who's watching right now, and, you know, those in the panel today. And this immigration movement has been happening for quite some time. So we're not going to stop. In 2006, you know, we took to the streets to fight for immigration reform. We're doing the same, you know, so many odd years later. And so it does get difficult though, right? Because you're also, in terms of geography where we're at and in the South, you have national legislation that wants to protect, that we're fighting for, but then you also have state legislation that is working against our community day in and day out. And I think that's why it's so important to have allies to lean on, to also vote some folks in that can really have our backs when it comes to, you know, fighting against legislation such as SB4. And then we also had to defend in-state tuition here in the state of Texas most recently, HB 1403. So there's just so many different things that we had to tackle along the way. And back to the overall question, right? In terms of what can we do, or how do we keep fighting? It's just like owning our power again. And I can't, you know, I drive this point home simply because a lot of us don't try to, or, you know, we feel the want and the need to go out there and really do something. And we want it in the terms of like now, or what does that look like? And with immigration, it's always so uncertain. So it's just like taking and organizing our communities, ensuring that we're giving them what they need, and just having their backs in any way that we can. So the USCIS memo, just to draw back really quickly, shortened the length of DACA to 1 year, and then also barred new applications from coming in. And that was the last missing piece that we needed from the decision made by the Supreme Court, right? It was like, the program is reinstated, but we were waiting on that green light from USCIS to come in and say, okay, new applications can start, you know, can be taken in. And then to get that gut punch was just a reminder of just how, you know, anti-immigrant electeds are working so hard against our community. But we don't fight. I mean, we're not going to stop fighting, right? There's obviously litigation that is going to fight it. And I'm really thankful for all of like the civil rights attorneys who have supported the immigrant community time and time again. So I'm looking to the attorneys here. I'm like, well, let's see what the litigation is going to look like and how we can continue this fight.
Thank you so much, Maria. Yes, the fight still continues. We're not going to stop until everyone, including all 11 million undocumented people, have a pathway to citizenship. Mm-hmm. And last but certainly not least, Juani, we know that you've been working tirelessly to promote the 2020 census here in my hometown, San Antonio, Texas. Oh. And yes, I'll hold it down. And we just want to talk about what kind of get out the count efforts you've been leading in order to promote the census here in San Antonio.
Yeah, definitely. So I was appointed to the San Antonio Bexar County Complete Count Committee, which is organized by the mayor and county judge. And so through it, I was one of the co-chairs for the education subcommittee. So the reason this is important is because the largest demographic, the largest group that doesn't get counted is minority kids. So people of color, kids that are in families that forget about them because they're under 5 years old. So pre-K kids or babies or folks that maybe, you know, when you're counting the folks in your family, you think of adults or you think of people that are in school, but those children, sometimes you don't. So a lot of my work was organizing with different partners like Avance and Head Start and Pre-K4SA and other schools and childcare centers to make sure that all of our families knew in Spanish and in English that they needed to count their babies. And this is important because how we count and who we count leads to how much money we get, right? And so as you know, especially working class families, you know, it's so important that our districts and our zip codes and our schools and our streets get the money that we deserve and that we're adequately accounted for. So a lot of our organizing was, again, partnering with organizations that already had the trust with the community and thinking through how we're making our content be culturally competent, how we're meeting people where they're at. Now, COVID-19 obviously threw a huge curveball in all of our lives, but when it comes to the census, it also made it a little bit harder, right? Because we're not seeing people at our churches, we're not seeing people in schools, we're not seeing folks where we usually would. So a lot of our efforts changed into digital ads, but also different creative ways. So for example, in every gas station in San Antonio, you might see that there is census media, census digital ads while you're pumping your gas in your cars. Our VIA, our public transportation system here, has been able to put big banners about the census on their buses, both outwardly facing, but also inside. So if you're taking the bus to work, because again, so many of our families are essential workers. So even though COVID has many of us at home, our families are out there, right, making this country run. And so through public transportation, they'll get reminders of the census. I've done a lot of interviews with Univision and Telemundo, events like this one, right? Having as many ways to plug and remind folks of why it's important to do the census, to complete the census, but then also who you need to count in your census, which is everybody in your home, from your abuelita to your kid to your baby newborn, right? So it's just so important. We're doing a lot of work there. And then I would say, you know, unfortunately, in a city like San Antonio, like ours, we have some of the highest poverty rates in the country. And with COVID-19, a lot of our families have had to rely on the food bank to get food on the table. So we've been able to partner with partners like the food bank and others to include census reminders in their food distribution sites, at their food distribution sites, or at the lunch bags that they might give the kids during the summer. So that's been also great. Again, just reminders, bilingual, culturally competent ways, so that our families know that it's still going and it's important.
Thank you so much, Juani. Yes, the deadline for self-response is September 30th. So encourage everyone to continue counting and make sure that everyone in their family, extended family, tios, abuelas, is counted. And all of you are doing such amazing work, and thank you all for just sharing your experiences. And we have one more question for all of you, and then we're going to move on to the Q&A.
Yes, like Jamie said, you're all doing amazing work. And I think you all touched on really important topics of what it means to advocate. And you really just honed in on what it means to not only, you know, get out there and do what you can, but also start investing. I think that's one of the things that we tend to miss whenever it comes to advocacy work. And it's really important, you know, to have that passion, to have that drive, but also just to make sure you reach out to community members and have them invest, whether it may be monetary resources or whatever the case may look like. So now we'll kind of just lead into the next question before we go to the Q&A from our audience. And I want to ask all of you on this panel, if you can just give one piece of advice, if it was just one thing, what would you tell young leaders in order to, you know, push them to get out there to try to create some type of change in their communities right now? I'll give you a second to think about it, because I know it can be, you know, one piece of advice is a little bit challenging. But Maria, if you want to start us off.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, like, to anybody who's like watching, I think it just starts with you and some friends. It doesn't have to look like the biggest thing you've ever done. It looks like you texting your friend, hey, did you hear about this? Or, hey, did you know this was happening? And getting everybody aware in your close networks. I know for me as a young person starting to organize in high school, it was just like me, like talking to my friends, and it's like, hey, they're redistricting. Did you know that was happening? And then it's like, how do we, like, what are the next steps? What does that look like? And how do we get there? So for me, it's not like you have to have the biggest plan to start. It's, you just have to have the will to do it and have some friends or your neighbors or your parents or your family, whoever that may look like to you, you know, to either, you know, keep your community safe, fight for some legislation that's on the table, or like petition to get the streets fixed. There's a lot of things that you can tackle. But one of the things is also like find your passion point, keep going. Once you're in it, you're gonna start finding people that support you unapologetically. And that's really how it all kind of just starts. And then next thing you know, you've been in it for like 10 years.
Awesome. Thank you, Maria. Afnan, do you want to take the question?
Sure, yeah. I think one of the biggest things about advocacy that can kind of intimidate a person from starting is that they think that it has to be like an organized movement and it has to be like an entire group of people. But sometimes I tell people that you can advocate on your own by just reaching out to your elected official, knowing who your state rep is, who your state senator is, setting up a meeting with them, grabbing coffee with them, grabbing coffee with the staffer, and just telling them about the issues that are happening in your community. Sometimes it takes just one conversation to let an elected official know what's actually happening. And I've seen it happen a lot. So it's something that I really, really want to stress is that it just takes sometimes one conversation and your issue is known about. And it's, you know, even if it's not acted upon immediately, at least it's like simmering in the office and legislation, and it's thought about. I want to give an example just to show how effective this is. There was an individual in our district that came up to us once and told us that she had noticed that in senior homes there was no emergency lighting, and she just came to us once, told us that piece of information. And 2 years later, there's now legislation to require senior emergency lighting in all senior homes in the Commonwealth of Mass. So it literally just took one person to come up to us and tell us about an observation that she had, and she made an entire and huge impact. So I just want to share the story as kind of an encouragement for you to take that time out of your day to learn who your elected officials are, go meet them, build that relationship with them. Don't be intimidated. They are getting paid to listen to you and listen to what your community needs and to provide those resources for you. So take advantage of that and tell them what's going on in your community and advocate for your own issues and what's happening in your inner circles.
Yes, that's super important, Afna. And I think oftentimes, you know, as constituents of our communities, we tend to forget the power of our voices. So you touching on that is really, really important. So on that note, John, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I definitely want to uplift what was just said, and also go back to something Maria said earlier, which is kind of, you were alluding to what the work actually is, and the work isn't necessarily always the protest. The work isn't necessarily always the big win, you know? And so I think my piece of advice is like, the work can actually be really frustrating. The work is actually really lengthy and time consuming. Building community organizing I'm referring to, right, is time consuming, and it can be frustrating and it can be difficult. But it's also incredibly dynamic and fruitful and visionary. And I think to young folks who are watching, or to folks who might be watching later, I think that we have to dispel the idea that young people are idealists, and that visionary kind of understanding of where we are and where we could be is somehow untenable. I think my piece of advice is really about making sure that, yes, focus on the work, do the work, get connected however you want to do it, whether that's on a national campaign, a statewide campaign, or right in your own hometown. But set those visions and recognize that you're able to actualize those by building with the people who are right next to you. And if you are already feeling that there is an injustice, then so too are others. And that's where you can build. People recognize that. And that's how we win.
Thank you, John. Juani, go ahead.
Great. So I would say first, I do not want to discredit the real fear that comes with getting involved. I first got involved in high school as well, very scared. My parents are immigrants from Mexico, learning all about the United States, learning all about how to navigate this country that has not always been the kindest to people like us, right? And figuring out where to start. So I want to acknowledge that it's valid and that we all need to, you know, be very graceful and like extend a lot of grace and compassionate to folks that want to get involved but don't know how. I would say, you know, it can vary from putting a comment on your elected leader's Instagram page or their Facebook, or organizing, texting a friend, asking them their opinion on something. you know, figuring out what is going on, Googling, doing a quick search, as silly as it might be, as to how your city council is looking at the budget, for example, since that is something that is happening nationwide. Most budgets locally will get approved and implemented before October 1st. So that is very important, right? We're talking about police budgets, we're talking about healthcare, we're talking about direct cash assistance, housing, public transportation. All of these things that affect us every day are happening. Those decisions are being made right now. So a quick search, reaching out, joining people like us, right? Following up, maybe on the Facebook or through a DM or something of like, hey, I heard this thing that you said. I don't know much about it, but it's interesting to me. Being a little bit, taking that risk, because you know it can be scary, but when you get out of your comfort zone, you'll realize how many other folks are equally minded and equally driven by similar causes. And the other, I don't want to say piece of advice, because like, who are we, right? But from my experience, something that is very important is that I root all of my comments, all of my statements, all of my posts, all of my advocacy on sentiments that I believe to my core are right. Because if I believe it to my core with my gut, porque me nace, right? Like it spread through you that you believe in something. If you're that strongly in conviction, you can't go wrong, right? Of course, we can definitely always grow, and there's a lot of unlearning that we also have to do. But if we really believe it because it's the right thing to do for our neighbors, for ourselves, for our families, because it's growing the net, the big tent, right, for others to have equal rights or better rights or equity, then I think it's okay to take those risks and be loud about them. So I think if you really, you know, set some time to reflect on things, on experiences you've been through or your family has been through or your neighbors have been through that just feel like they weren't right, that there was something that could have been done differently, and think through why that might be, and then drive yourself through that core, I don't think you'll go wrong in whatever you decide to do.
Thank you so much, Juani. Yes, I think all of you make excellent points, especially that it doesn't have to be anything big. We can always start small. My advocacy work began a senior in high school, demanding that the counselor educate herself on what it means to file for TASPA and educate and promote education for undocumented students. And so it didn't start anything extravagant. It's a process. Like all of you said, it's a process, and we're always learning and unlearning things in order to improve and build and strengthen our communities.
Yes. One thing I want to add is just going back to a point that was made earlier is that, you know, advocacy has no age. And I appreciate just, you know, the fact that that was said, because it's true. It's never too young to start educating the little ones, and even getting our grandparents and people who are older in that age range to start telling them, you know, you have the power to make a change in your community. It doesn't matter what age you are. So Jamie, if you want to take it into our Q&A.
Yes, and so we're going to go ahead and start our Q&A session, and we already have quite a bit of questions today, and I can go ahead and ask the first, share the first one. And so one of the first ones is, who can we start connecting to if we want to start advocating on certain issues? Are there any specific organizations that y'all recommend?
I would just, because the nature of this question is kind of broad, I would just kind of, again, shout out like relational organizing. Like if you're looking to do work in your community, there's somebody who works for your city or your town. There's your neighbor, somebody in your family, somebody actually already probably is doing the work and you might not know about it. I think, yeah, so, but it's definitely, you know, regionally specific and state specific. And so, but I think for whatever your interest is, right, or whatever issue you're trying to solve, folks are working on it. Like, if COVID has done anything, it's forced us to really look inward and also think about what are our resources, and our resources are ourselves and each other. So people are doing the work. You kind of just, yeah, I would say just look out.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Let me go ahead and pull up the next question. And if anyone has anything to add to that one.
You know, it is hard sometimes. There's so many organizations doing great work. Sometimes they're doing similar work. But it might be good to look through social media, right? So looking for keywords that you care about. So social justice, big term. But what about like gun safety or police brutality, you know, or pick your town and then use a keyword and look through it and see what pops up. That can help kind of expand your understanding of what's out there. And then looking through LinkedIn, obviously it depends where you're at, right? I didn't know about LinkedIn in high school, but now I do. And sometimes, like, if I hear about an organization that I think is doing cool work because I read it about it, or I saw it on Twitter, or I saw it on the news, I go to LinkedIn and I search that org, and it tells you like people that work there. And you'll be surprised. Like, sometimes there's people from your hometown that work there. There's people that went to your college or your high school, or et cetera, et cetera. So it can be helpful to do a little digging and see if maybe you have some relationships, or just take a risk. You know, I remember when these are like safe risks, I think, but I remember learning about MALDEF once, and I didn't realize that the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund was started in San Antonio, my hometown. And I had heard about them in Univision, and they were doing a lot of immigration work. And so I DM'd the page, and then I got an internship there. So it was just kind of, or in DM, meaning like a direct message on Facebook, and being like, hi, my name is Juani, and I'm looking for, you know, an internship. I want to learn more. And then, like, you know, it happened. So those safe risks that come from knowing what you care about and doing a little research can work out well.
Awesome. So we're getting more questions as you are giving your feedback on this. So we have a question from Dario. He says, first, I would like to thank all of you for the hard work that you're all doing, especially for immigrants like himself. He wants to know, can you talk about how hard it is to do advocacy work in states like Texas? He says, for what I know, Texas is a red state, and that basically means that there's so many anti-immigrant people. I would also like to know if there are any instances of mistreatment while doing amazing advocacy work. Once again, thank you all for the amazing work you're doing.
I'll jump in really quickly. It is tough, but it's not impossible. There's a really great quote about just a continuation of work will lead to great results. So it's just been an ongoing effort as far as like immigration work, especially in the state of Texas. But then you think about, we were the leader in enacting in-state tuition. So it's just like, we've been in a space where we have supported our immigrant community. And I believe that we can definitely, you know, regain that as a state. It is ridiculously red. And that's where, you know, our very local on the ground efforts also include like GOTV. Even as an immigrant organization, right, we always just encourage folks to register to vote. And as far as mistreatment, there's always going to be mistreatment, unfortunately. I do want to recognize, Juani, when you mentioned that literal fear, it's very scary. You have people who want to threaten to call ICE, which Matt Rinaldi threatened to call ICE on protesters when we were inside the state capitol, which ensued a fight on the floor. And so essentially there is a lot of hardships, but we know it's not impossible because we've seen the victories that have come out of the state. And it's just about ongoing efforts and strategizing also, right? Like having organizations that have the capacity to help us with strategic movements that really help us get to where we need to be. And as far as like discouragement, I'm always uplifted by the, you know, resilience of our community each and every day. I think it goes without saying, anytime I touch base with one of our community members, it like literally relives my soul in terms of like, this is why we're doing the work. It's like, it's a very selfless also line of work to do, because there's so many of us, right? Like, and immigration isn't just a Latino issue, it's a global issue, right? Like there's so many people that we can lean on, and there's so many people we're fighting for on a constant day-to-day basis. But there's always space for everybody. We take, and yeah, that's just kind of how we kept going. I don't know if Juani wants to add something to it.
That was great. I agree. There's good people doing the work. There are more of us than there are haters. That doesn't mean we won't stumble upon haters, but there are more of us. And so know that you will be supported through it. You just got to find the right people, or they got to find you. So keep going for it.
Awesome. So now we have a question for Afnan. So the person says, we actually heard about the work that you've done with prison reforms, and we are extremely thankful for that. How would we be able to help as a community?
I would say there's two different ways that you can help with that. I think the first one is, and it kind of goes back to an initial question that was asked about where do we even start? It's really just finding the right advocacy group. And I can say that criminal justice reform, there's so many, and I think it's really in every state. It's definitely a prevalent issue across the country, and it's going to be really easy to find advocacy groups. And one way you can do that, and it kind of goes back to my initial points, is honestly sometimes just calling your own state rep or state legislator and asking them, can you lead me to some advocacy groups in your district or in your area that are focusing on this issue? And more than often, you will definitely get those answers, and you will get those reliable advocacy groups that you can go to. And the second thing I would say is just learning about the different policies that are targeting prison reform right now. Spreading awareness about those is really important. A lot of the times people just don't really know what issues are happening in the prisons, what policies need work on, whether it's solitary confinement or just the cost of phone calls or just the treatment overall. Just learning about those first and then spreading awareness about it so that it's others who are also learning and wanting to create that reform.
Awesome, thank you. So now we have a comment from Sean. He just says, pre-COVID, I found legislator receptive to even stopping in, even just by showing up without an appointment. Always bring a friend, he suggests. It adds to your credibility. If you have a few bills you're interested in, tell them that you would like to talk to someone in that policy area. Ask for their opinion on an issue. The fact that you even showed up shows that you are invested enough to make an effort. It makes a difference. So I think it touches upon what you talk about, Afnan, and also John and everyone on our panel, just, taking that initiative and, having those conversations with people who are currently elected, but also just people in your community. I think whenever you show that you have an interest and a passion, it just really amplifies, what you want to do, what you want to work in, and what change you're going forward to. So Jamie, if you want to take it from here.
All righty. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I feel inspired and refueled to go out there and change the world right now. And I just want to close everything out with a few tips for our participants. And so, like I said, thank you all. And we just have a few tips and call to actions for our viewers. And so our panelists shared ideas and experiences on how they're changing and how they're transforming their communities. And so now we're asking you all to do the same thing. And we're giving you 3 ways to do it right now. And so the first one is census. And have you completed your 2020 census? And if you haven't, this is your sign to do so right now after this event. Right after you log off, fill out the census. It only takes 10 minutes. And once you complete the census, contact at least 3 people, whether it be family members, friends, your neighbors, and encourage them to take the census and just share reasons why it's so important and why they deserve to be counted. I know that Juani shared a lot of information on why it's so important, from school funding to funding social services. And so sharing how it really impacts your community is so vital, and it also encourages people to complete the census. And the second one is voter registration. And if you're eligible, I encourage you to register to vote. I know that deadlines vary by state. And so just look through that and just make sure that you're registered to vote. And once you're registered, encourage 3 other people to register to vote. It's especially important right now. This year, so much has changed. and we've learned so much. And so I encourage you to reach out to 3 people and help them register to vote, tell them to vote, tell them that their voice deserves to be heard and that all of us deserve to be seen during this election. And the next one, Irma?
Yes. So the last thing that we want to encourage everybody to do is just to engage with local outreach. So we want you to, use the tools and the resources that you've gotten from this panel just in order for you to figure out what's happening in your community right now and what needs to change. What bothers you? I think that's one of the main questions that, was brought up in this conversation. What bothers me? Like, what kind of angers me? What do I find wrong? And what do I want to do about it? So, just encourage you all to see what's happening in your communities and what you can do to change it by getting involved and just engaging in those conversations as well. So with that having said, we just want to thank everybody for, joining us in this amazing panel. I know that, you probably learned a lot of things and you're overwhelmed with a lot of positivity and a lot of tips and tricks on, how to get involved, how to stay in this work, but also just how to persist. So we want to thank everyone once again for joining our panel, and for everyone on this panel too. We just want to continue thanking you for everything that you continue to do on this difficult time of COVID-19. So with that having said, we wish you all the best. And again, thank you everyone for joining. Have a great night.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night. Thank you to all our panelists once again.
Thank y'all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, Juani.
Bye.
Have a good night. All right. Let me go ahead and close the Facebook Live.
Great job, y'all. That was great.
Thank you.